I'm here today with Bill Tai. Bill is the co-founder of Actai Global, which we can talk about later. The co-founder of Treasure Data, co-founder of Extreme Tech Challenge, which is the world's largest startup competition. He's also a partner at Charles River Ventures and one of the first investors in Zoom, which is where we are right now. Thanks so much for being here, Bill. I'm really curious to know what you've been up to and what you're building. And, you know, I see you as an influencer in so many things. So I'm really happy that you're here today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. So what am I up to? I guess, in the big picture, you mentioned Actai Global. I think it's always worth introducing what that is. The acronym Acti, it actually stands for athletes, conservationists, technologists, artists, innovators. It started as a group of people in Silicon Valley, mostly tech entrepreneurs that started a kite surf together, actually windsurf and then kite surf later. And it kind of just grew into a really interesting organization of people that ultimately had some success and influence. And we ended up incorporating it as a 501c3. We support two general areas. One is environmental conservation, and the other is economic empowerment through entrepreneurship. In the conservation side, we support other organizations like Mission Blue and Ocean Elders. And with Mission Blue, we helped create a hope spot that covers 116 islands, a marine conservation area off of Western Australia. The economic empowerment stuff turned into a contest called the Extreme Tech Challenge, which has grown into one of the bigger startup competitions in the world. It started originally with the Consumer Electronics Show and Richard Branson's island where we would hold the finals. So we would have, lots of companies enter, 10 would get picked to present at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, which is the world's largest technology trade show. 3 would get picked to present on Necker Island, and it's turned into something big. Recently, this season, we aligned it with the United Nations and the
Cool
goals. And this is among the reasons that we have all these categories now. The UN obviously came up with an amazing framework called the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. And there are 17 general areas that touch on all of the things that would be needed to really make this planet a better place. And we decided to take our contest and align the contest categories with those goals. And some of the goals overlap a little bit, like, life on land, life underwater. They're two separate categories. So we just sort of lump, those into life on the planet, kind of things. And there are other categories around economic empowerment and smart cities, things that will ultimately lead to a better future.
Awesome. So I noticed that you recently added the biotech category to the Extreme Challenge. And so I wanted to know what your thoughts on that were and how did this happen?
Yeah, so technology has obviously been playing a very, very big role in the advancement of techniques that generate a lot of value. And, coming up, my history is one that was very digital. I started as a computer chip designer, ended up moving from chips to networking equipment, to internet-related telco things, and then ultimately to the user interface, and then the data science that kind of monitors and optimizes the moving of the bits. And through those various waves of technology, it became very apparent that, of course, technology does a lot of interesting things, digital and biotechnology, in lowering the friction to things that can bring a lot of value and making things more replicable and scalable so that they can really spread fast and grow and be impactful. And so as the Extreme Tech Challenge started to really evolve into more than what it was when it started, and let me back up there too, because it actually started off of a kiteboarding trip in Australia around a group of kiteboarders and students at Curtin University in Perth that were trying to build mobile apps. And the very first iteration of what became this worldwide startup competition with the UN was called the Western Australia App Awards. And, there was that period about 10 years ago, coincident with the release of the iPhone, where any kid in a dorm room could get on a computer, design something, and see it just go to great scale. And people like Mark Zuckerberg were doing that. And I started to fund a lot of sort of 1- and 2-person companies that included things like Tango and Voxer and TweetDeck. And the fund I had formed was the first $250K check into Twitter.
Cool.
And it was just amazing to see these things grow. So when I was on a kiteboarding trip to Australia, I did a little speaking engagement at Curtin University, which is a 50,000 student university across a number of campuses. And I was giving this talk, and there were a bunch of people in that audience that were young people. And I looked at the room and I said, somebody in this room is going to go back to their dorm room and code something up. I should figure out who that is. And so I decided to throw a contest. And in that first contest, for example, was Melanie Perkins, who founded Canva. And so that first WAP Awards then became the Oz App Awards, covering the country, and started to grow regionally. And then ultimately, we started to throw contests in other countries like Brazil and Latin America. And then we had this intersection with Sir Richard Branson, because we were on his island. And on his island, we were doing kiteboarding trips there as well. People started to talk about what they were doing and pitch each other, and Richard would sit in. And so we decided then, well, why don't we just step this thing up, turn it into something? We called it the Extreme Tech Challenge. And then it sat in that form for about 6 years until last year, when we kind of partnered it up with the United Nations SDGs. And so with that history, what I think we learned was technology could have great impact at scale very quickly, and that there were certain categories in the Sustainable Development Goals that were not purely digital. And so if you think about things like health, and you think about food safety or food availability, yes, there are components to digital that make the operations of health a little more efficient, or portability of data, or in the food safety category, supply chain related things. But there were also things coming and happening that weren't just atoms and bits, but molecules. And so to the extent there's innovation that is happening around new kinds of molecules that do interesting things, or the understanding of existing molecules in, say, the microbiome, it was obvious that there were going to be categories there that were significant. And you can see it expressed in so many ways. When I look at the market valuations on the electron side of things like Tesla, or on the molecule side of things like Beyond Meat, it's very, very clear that there are ways now to engineer molecules to do things that reduce the impact of humans on this planet, that make the world more sustainable, and that there's a return that's possible at venture scale for these kinds of things that did not really exist before. So it's a long-winded answer to say, it's time. We did it because it's time.
Do you think that we're entering the engineering biology century, the Eng Bio century?
I think we're entering an acceleration of its applicability, both from an engineering standpoint, where the tools are now available to remake and repurpose solutions more quickly. So I think the ability to discover has been greatly enhanced in the last few years. And I think also the fundability of these projects has also gone up a lot, both because of the overarching need for a more sustainable planet, and the capital markets generally being more available to things like I mentioned, like a Beyond Meat, because there are precedents and examples now that make sense for other areas.
Well, all of our supply chains and systems are changing. and we've seen it happen, almost overnight. And so it's really important now that we start thinking very differently. So I see you as being part of that group of people who are really reimagining the future, reimagining this new normal. And so if you were to have a message for, say, a global community, which is what you've really been working on for quite some time now, what would that message be around? Would it be, hey, we need to wake up, connect, move, take action?
I'd say the people, I think it's clear to me that there's a movement happening on its own. Whether or not there are folks like me as part of it, there's a groundswell that's already happening. And so I'd say, just recognize where you are and enjoy the ride. It's happening, it's real. The success cases that I've mentioned already, like a Beyond Meat and others, it tells you that the timing is better, the markets are receptive. Consumers today, especially the younger generation, they care a lot about what a brand stands for. I think, if you clock back 30 years or 40 years, the kinds of brands that were built post World War II that were really all about profit. It's kind of like, just build a company that is very profitable. If it's a Coca-Cola, Warren Buffett will buy your shares and hold them forever. And yeah, those companies definitely still matter because they own a large footprint of distribution. But there's no question that the values under which people choose to then buy their products and make choices matter. And if a brand doesn't stand for something positive, people aren't interested. And if a brand stands for things that aren't positive, whether or not they express it, your sales are going to decline. So I think, the overarching market trends are just there, which then draws the investment capital. And I think the technologies around analysis of anything, the supply chains, the data moving around representing that, or ways to look at the kind of the simulation of modeling of how molecules will interact. A lot of that stuff is digital now, so you can go through a lot of cycles fast and learn faster. So we're at a point where all that stuff can accelerate today in a way that it couldn't before.
It's kind of a very exciting time to be alive.
Sure.
So what do you see happening in the future once with the coronavirus? Do you see the coronavirus as being the last pandemic or the beginning of many pandemics to come? I mean, you were one of the first investors in Zoom, so you must have seen something coming.
I have to say that I did see how the structural change in technology to the cloud was going to provide somebody like a Zoom, and I'm glad it was them because I wrote a check, to have a truly competitive advantage over prior generations of technology in a big market. I wouldn't have predicted the pandemic, and I wouldn't have predicted the rate of adoption that Zoom has gone through. I mean, totally mind-blowing. I think, last December, the company had set up a infrastructure to handle around 10 million people a day online.
Wow.
And by February, there were 200. And then by April, 300 million meetings a day happening on this infrastructure.
Incredible.
Tribute to the team, first of all, and then to the enabling technology of the cloud to allow it to scale to that extent, a 20x and then a 30x within a matter of months. You couldn't have done that without the kinds of technologies that exist today that are applicable to a lot of other things too. But I'd say, as I think about what's happened there, and to answer your questions more specifically, the pandemic, it's an interesting shock to the system that has done a lot of harm, but it's also, I don't know if I'd call it good, but it has accelerated the things that were meant to be and put a world of hurt on a bunch of things that are meant to fade. So the things that were meant to fade, I think, are fading faster. The things that were meant to be, like the way we live online and the backbone of the internet, things that you knew were already becoming pervasive, but are becoming really pervasive as the infrastructure to our lives. It accelerated the adoption and the investment into the infrastructure and make everything seamless. And then, go ahead.
Yeah. So now that we're here, we're living this mainly digital life. One thing that I really always admired about you, Bill, was how you brought people together in a warm and open and friendly environment where people could connect really authentically and do meaningful things. And so we are still having that longing to connect in person, and we're still trying to think of creative ways to move forward and have meetings that are offline. Would you still do the kiteboarding meetings? You still do the gatherings?
We
What
will
does the
when we
future look
can.
like?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think, there are small things that are happening at small scale, kind of just people getting together for sure. Because I think humans do have a need to collaborate and touch beyond just a screen. We are, subject to air travel becoming lower friction. We are trying to put together a couple of things for 2021. We had some planned this summer, one in Bali and some other things this summer, but obviously the travel restrictions just took those off the calendar. Next year, I think we would like to do something in Maui again. I think we may, I guess, depending on travel again, we may put together a group around Davos and around the crypto finance conference in January. I don't know what, that's coming up fast, so I don't know if travel is going to be good then or not. In the summer, we'd love to try to get something together around in Maui, where kind of the birthplace of our community was. And, I'll give you a general sense of what the agenda would be like, which will be really fun. But we were thinking about kicking off on a Wednesday night, an athletes dinner for the A and Acti, and honoring a bunch of the professional and Olympic athletes that are part of our community. And then the next morning, we would have a bunch of conservation talks. So folks like Sylvia Earle or Ocean Ramsey, or the people that have supported us with the speakers in the past, on Thursday morning. And then Thursday evening, some entertainment by some of the artists that are part of our community. People like Alex Cruz, the DJ, Matt Sorum from Guns N' Roses does an amazing drum solo with a mix of his music. I don't know exactly what we'll do, but things like that. And then Friday, tech and innovation talks around sustainability. So that'd be a typical thing, and kiteboarding all the way through in the afternoons. In the fall, or at the intersection, kind of September, August, September, we're trying to lay out a schedule for a Hope Spot that is being planned off of Sicily with Mission Blue around the Aeolian Islands, which is a wonderful, full of nature place with good wind. And I think we'd want to get kind of a boat and a place to stay and do a bunch of talks around science, and then some activities that bond people around kiteboarding, free diving, surfing, and exploration of that area as we put together the work to turn it into a conservation area.
That sounds incredible. I really hope that we can be involved, that we can collaborate with the Genesis Consortium and our community. Right now, my job is to help move resources into these more sustainable technologies. And I think we're all on that same mission, not just moving resources, but attention, storytelling, you name it. And I think that we're moving into a really exciting period of doing things differently, and particularly around the meeting and gathering safely, but having more connection with the environment that we are here to steward. And so I will be happy to spread that word when it comes up, and hopefully we can continue these conversations in the form of fireside chats and get more people involved. And is there anything else that you had on your plate right now? You have your hands in so many different things.
I'd say, a couple that touch this area. You mentioned Fireside Chats. So we do every 2 weeks, we have somebody from our community touching, we have a lot of people that are very, very deep in certain areas. And as a result, they're kind of, thought leaders or industry leaders in their fields. And we use the, Zoom and our Fireside Chats to share information. In 2 days, we have Dr. Sylvia Earle, who's coming up to talk about Hope Spots, what that program is, why one should care. And we may or may not touch, depending on, because we're not that advanced on our travel planning, but we may touch on what that trip may be about on that call too. So at 9 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, Pacific Coast time, 2 days from now, if you want to join, please feel free. And there's always a bunch of people to hang afterwards that just, social chat and it's kind of the way people preserve serendipity. I think one of the things that's always worked on our in-person gatherings, they're a little bit unstructured. There's a little bit of structure in the morning, but a lot of the day is really just free form. And it allows for what Sir Richard called shaping serendipity. Kind of,
I like that.
A framework around which serendipity can happen. And there is actually a blog post that he wrote called Shaping Serendipity that was about one of our gatherings. I'll send you the link later. You can look it up.
Please do. I'm writing that down.
Yeah,
really
and then
resonates.
I'd say, I'm right in the middle. Last week, I funded 3 new companies.
Oh?
I 2 of them, and I committed to one. Those projects, one is very directly related to what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the winner of, so for the Extreme Tech Challenge this year, we had 2,400 companies enter that were from a total of 87 countries and 6 continents. And those were funneled into a group of 52 finalists. And then finally, they were vetted by other venture capital people to 7 category winners, and then a female founder award and a COVID solutions winner. And it so happens that the female founder award went to somebody that was in the food ag tech category too. And that company, I just literally wired last Friday, and hit the account today. But it's a company called Microgen.
Oops, you froze.
It's a fascinating company. It's a former PhD scientist from one of the big pharma companies that figured out a way to grow with regular bacteria a microbiome that is used to coat plant seeds.
Okay.
And in this particular case, she sells a patented solution that rice farmers dip the seeds and dry them and implant them. And the root systems of these plants grow this bacteria layer that filters out heavy metals. So it takes cadmium and arsenic and all the things that build up in your system that you can't get rid of. So you're unpoisoning yourself.
That is directly in our wheelhouse. What's the name of the company again?
Microgen Bio.
Microgen Bio. Okay.
And hit me up later. I'll send you a link to it. But it's they're already generating substantial revenue. They have contracts with rice farmers in China. Nice. And a couple of other places. But there's a possibility that there's a contract kind of developing now that they may end up being the annual solution applied to 70 million acres of farms. So it could be one of these like true breakthrough things, and we'll see. You never know if these things will happen or not. But it's they've got it. They're beyond the prototype phase, and just an amazing management team. And they were the winner. You can watch the winner speak and answer questions about our company on the video recording of the finals of the Extreme Tech Challenge.
Awesome.
And then
who are the judges in the biotech category? I think I know somebody from UCSF Medical Center.
Yeah, there's somebody from there, somebody from the UN, from the food safety. I guess the head of the food safety thing. There were some venture capitalists that were involved in biotech. So it was actually a pretty heavy hitting group.
Nice. Well, yeah. I'm super excited to hear that, Bill. I think it's exciting to not only for me to talk about biotech, but to engage others and see others seeing the power of what it can do. So it's really awesome.
Yeah, and then my other project that has taken some time the last 4 or 5 months, after having started, as I mentioned, in sort of, I used to move electrons around on chips and then move them and bits through phone systems and comm equipment. Then I started funding a lot of stuff at the user interface, like I mentioned, the TweetDecks and Tangos, etc. I got into data science about 8 or 10 years ago, co-founding this company, Treasure Data. And we were basically, I had this epiphany. It was so clear to me that companies that really understood their data were the winners versus the ones that didn't. And it was happening first in the digital world. So, Facebook really understood their users because they could measure everything and tell what was working, what was not. LinkedIn, the same. There were early competitors to both of those that didn't play out because they were just more of a faddish user interface. So the ones that really engineered to understand the data won. And very, very similar to the physical world, where you look at companies like Walmart or Amazon compared to a JCPenney or Sears. That example is very visceral because, JCPenney and Sears were basically just, random buyers going out to Asia, picking up some stuff, putting it into warehouses. It may or may not have sold at Christmas. And you can think of an Amazon or particularly a Walmart as a data science cloud with point of sale terminals on the end of it, where it's a living system and you know where everything is, when it's short, when you've got too much and you move it. You can think of the modern businesses that are more efficient than prior ones, like an Uber versus black car fleets. It's basically a data science cloud with cars on the end of it. Or Airbnb is a data science cloud with rooms on the end of it. They don't need to have buildings everywhere, right? So if you think about the power of data science, it's determining who needs less working capital, who needs less inventory, who has better sales per dollar of investment. Very, very clear. And it's changing out. Every company in the Fortune 100, the ones that do it live, the ones that don't die. And so Treasure Data was really built on that premise to be able to take that kind of technology. We had a Hadoop data infrastructure that was multi-tenant, meaning many people could use it, and a layer of tools that people could build machine learning applications on and applications to apply to their businesses. And it was quite a hit. By 2018, we were ingesting 7 trillion rows of data per month for our customers, and then SoftBank bought it. So with that now out of the way, I'm moving up the stack a little bit more, and I just took the core data science team out of Cambridge Analytica, which they're notorious for a bunch of reasons. They didn't mean to steer the election. They were just doing their job on the data, but they were very good at really understanding with a click, they could know who somebody was and what their preferences were and knew how to steer content to influence decisions by that person. And we did the same thing. Treasure Data, we did exactly the same thing for companies like Wish. We were the engine upon which, when you click on Facebook, we knew who you were and we would serve you products and tune. They did the same thing with votes. We did it with $10 purchases. And so the team, I've taken them out and we're basically applying that really strong data engine to things in supply chain that will make the world more efficient around the sustainable development goals. And we're not hitting all of them, but there's a couple of areas that we just know they're not efficient today and can be made a lot more efficient. So that's my other project. It's called Dyad, is the company name.
Dyad, is that D-I-A-D?
D-Y-A-D.
D-Y-A-D, okay. We'll check it out.
Seed stage. We should have our first product up and running in 90 days. From here, we'll see.
Wow, you work fast. I love it. So you've got a lot on your plate right now. There's Actai Global. There's the Extreme Tech Challenge competition that's now partnered with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Mm-hmm. And you've got Treasure Data, which you've taken the Cambridge Analytica team and now you're applying them to do something positive and transform supply chains. And anything else you want to share with us today before we sign off?
Oh boy, I am going to fund another one of the XCC winners, and I'm not going to say who that is yet because or maybe two of them, because till they close, I won't mention. But I am going to fund a couple more there, and and then there's just a ton of activity around Zoom as well. Zoom has become a pervasive infrastructure for everything from education to yoga instructors, kind of teaching small classes. And they've made available to the world a great API and SDK upon which people can build. And I think we're where we were in a world of moving electrons in the 80s, and then bits in the 90s and 2000s and recently. Now we're really in the world of moving assets and moving people virtually. So if you think about the concept of a digital twin, the Uber and Airbnb work because they've essentially made a software model that represents each of the assets, and they're connected to a marketplace system, right? And so they've totally revolutionized the efficiency of transportation. And companies like Zoom have effectively done the same thing to you and me. They've virtualized us, so we can be anywhere, anytime, and the value of that meeting no longer has to be physical. It's been abstracted into a bunch of bits. And so as I look at that foundational sea change, now the tuning of the economics around that, from everything, as I mentioned, from education to a yoga instructor who can reach a larger audience and actually monetize and bill for it, the game is totally changed.
It's totally changed. I mean, just in the running events sphere, we're realizing my own mental block is that I really can reach anybody in the world now.
Yes. Well, and as you think about monetizing, I did seed, actually, I did invest in 3 companies last week. The third one is Zoom URL.
Okay.
ZM URL. They're going to change their name, but they have developed an incredibly easy, low friction interface for somebody to build a business on Zoom. So it's kind of like, think of it as a CRM and billing system on Zoom for everything.
Okay.
So set up your next meeting on that one.
Okay, so the next thing that brings me to think about, we're running our virtual program now. We run a program for scientists for 4.5 months. It's a boot camp, and we've virtualized everything, and that's what we're trying to hack. We're trying to figure out how we use Zoom to really optimize our program and ultimately operate business, build businesses.
Yes, that's a great space. And, I do know of teams that are building some interesting meeting flow. I think both in the education space and regular kind of, how do you drive meetings? And I guess I should mention this too. We're tentatively, Acti is going to be helping to drive 2 online meetings for the United Nations, different parts of the UN. On or about October 5th through 9th, we're doing something with the UN Joint SDG Fund. The date's got to get locked down based on the Deputy Secretary General's calendar. And that one's going to bring to the world, it already exists, but it's sort of a web launch of the Joint SDG Fund, which is a multi-$100 million pool of capital that they've put together to fund things that are in line with the UN SDGs on a for-profit basis, to try to, obviously generate a positive return, as well as a kind of recurring flywheel for people to keep putting money into these things and growing better businesses. And then around November 14th, we're doing something with the UN Innovation Labs, which will focus on the UN's recent establishment of 40 accelerators around the world, because they have offices in almost every country in the world. So in 40 of those, they've set up little places where people that have a little bit of entrepreneurial tendency can come in and get advice and network and help they need to start businesses. Hopefully they'll be sustainable, or sustainability oriented. But I think the UN is coming to, a recognition that a lot of the economic development going forward is in the hands of the next generation of entrepreneurs, and can be done this way. But I think as we highlight their vision and their opportunities, we're going to collaborate with them and the XTC, and we may have a couple of the XTC winners online on November 14th with an amazing lineup of people that are just star entrepreneurs and kind of leaders in their field to inspire entrepreneurs everywhere.
So that leads me to my last 2 questions. What is it that you look for in an entrepreneur? What are those star qualities?
It's really, so what draws me to make an investment, and there's a variety of things, including the entrepreneur. I have to feel like it's a very big market that is well timed, and that there's some sort of structural transition that's going to allow a raw startup to have a shot. And you don't get those in stagnant markets. So if there's some sort of disruptive change, like when the iPhone came out and smartphones came out in general, it enabled this giant ecosystem of these new user interfaces on the phone, whether it was Twitter or TweetDeck or Tango or Voxer or the things I funded. And then I described the data science wave to you, that just the computation ability and the ability to process the data had really changed, that allowed ambient data to be analyzed in a way they couldn't before. So it created that wave. And Zoom, the cloud, so cloud was really big for me, kind of 2010 to 2013. That's when I funded Canva, which is cloud design, Zoom, which is cloud video, Bitfury, cloud currency, Treasure Data, Cloud Hadoop. And I think so the market structure change has to feel right upcoming. And then I think finding an entrepreneur that has some combination, doesn't have to be all these, but a background that gives him an edge in understanding what the problem set is to be solved. Melanie, despite her age, had been trying to teach people how to use Adobe for years and knew that it was a high friction solution to problems that she had making high school yearbooks. So she knew hands-on what the pain points were. Eric had been running WebEx, so he knew what the pain points were for his customers. The guys that started Treasure Data had been building Hadoop infrastructure for other people. They knew, what it was like. And so I think looking for that transition, looking for somebody that has the right background, and then I'd say beside the background specifically in the space, the value set of that entrepreneur. Because I think for me, I like to get involved in the early stages and work with people. And so for me, it's a little bit like a marriage. I've been involved in these companies, like the ones I've mentioned, for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And it's really only the beginning. So if I feel like I can work with the person, I'll consider it. If I feel like I can't, for too narcissistic or whatever, like people are too a little over the edge, it just, I can't, I don't have that bond. So it's really kind of, chemistry, values, market, timing. All of those are requirements.
Cool. So this brings me to the last question I have for you. You're on our Emergent Leadership series. I have a lot of admiration for you, Bill. What are your thoughts on leadership and what we need going forward? We have our elections coming up in November. What's the world lacking around in leadership?
Wow, this is a big topic. Okay, so I don't know how to make this one short, but I'll try to make it as short as I can.
I think you have 10 minutes. You can.
Yeah, I think it's, I think it's really values. I think, when I think about what makes a company really work, independent of the training and experience of the people, it's the values around which the organization has melded. And when people make decisions or organizations make decisions, those decisions really come from a frame of reference of what do you stand for? What are the values around which you form your decisions? And I think somehow the last couple of election cycles, America's kind of lost its values. I think it's sort of, there are good values in both of the main candidates today, but there are a lot of bad values in one of them in particular. And I think the world, because of the changes to the structure of our economy, has left a lot of people sort of dangling and not in a position where they can actually be economically productive and therefore feel a sense of empowerment. They feel totally disenfranchised for a lot of reasons. And so the candidate we have in office today, I think, appeals to that. And it's a structural issue. He's just, I mean, he is what he is. I think he's been able to appeal to people's insecurities with false, in my opinion, false hopes and promises. And so I think whoever we elect, I think we need to basically get down to the very grassroots of what do people really stand for individually and together. And the nonprofit Acti Global, we have a couple of values that are our guiding principles. One is stand for something greater than yourself. The other is leave people and places better off after interacting. And the last is use your power to empower others. And you can't get everybody to live that way, but I try, and I think what has really worked in our community to produce the outsized outcomes of things like a Canva. How do you take a 19-year-old girl in Perth making yearbooks in her mom's living room and turn it into a $200 million annual revenue, 75% gross margin, profitable company for 3 years? Didn't happen by itself, right? It was clearly driven by the entrepreneurs, but the support of the community, both in funding and delivering ideas and the network around where people really contribute. If you can have something where the sum of the parts is much greater than the whole, and people are always giving, it's better for everybody. And I use a concept that I talk about every once in a while called living in karma deficit. And if you just take the two words, karma deficit, it doesn't sound very good. It's like, why would I want to live with less karma than anyone else? But if you really think about what that is, if everybody gave more karma than they took every day, you would have an explosion. It would just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what you find is, I think, when you give and you put out, it comes back to you eventually. And if you're always putting out more, you're going to have more in the end at some point. But I think if everybody did that together, you just have a rising wave. And I think that is really what is at the core of what has been our community this last 15 years. So that's what we need, new values.
Well, that's a beautiful note to begin on, because this is only the beginning, and I hope to see all of these movements grow and for everyone to step up and contribute more in their highest. And so thank you so much, Bill, for being here today.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you in the future.
I'm sure we will. Yes, look forward to it.